We Are Vineyard.
There's nothing you have to create to do the work that God's calling you to do as you're trying to pursue justice, and I would say evangelism too. So if you look at what would be genuine good news for your city, genuine good news, that's probably some kind of issue of making a wrong right, and then some kind of issue of sharing that news with other people so they kind of join on board, either as someone that's being helped or someone that could become someone that serves. That's probably already happening in your city and town. And so what if every Vineyard church was able to discern through the same kinds of things we do when we pray for sick people? Where's my city sick? Where are we experiencing some kind of strength or gifting? And how can those things come together to serve in a powerful and effective way?
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. In today's episode, our host, Jay Pathak, speaks with Josh Williams, Vineyard USA's Associate National Director for Evangelism and Justice. Let's listen in.
Josh, thanks for joining me to do our podcast.
Of course.
This is fun because you and I spent, was that 8 days, 9 days?
Yep, something like that.
It was 8 or 9 days pretty much continually together only a couple weeks ago. Mm-hmm. We went over the UK we celebrated the Queen's Jubilee together.
We did.
No less.
70 years.
70 years. The truth is, we didn't know it was happening during that time till about a week before, but we happened to be there to celebrate, which was great. Parties, big party at Buckingham Palace. It was good. Flags,
it was good.
Lots of flags.
Alicia Keys was there.
Alicia Keys, amazing. Yeah, it was good. Lots of good times. Okay, so you've listened to this before, and so you know a bit of what we do. I would just love to hear some of your story and how it's led to even this brand new role, Associate National Director of Justice and Evangelism. So tell me a little bit about where you grew up. And I love doing this because I know a lot of your story.
You
so
do.
I'm excited to plumb into some pieces of it. So tell me about where you grew up.
Yeah.
A little bit about you.
So I grew up in Burlington, Iowa. I was born in Indianapolis, Indiana. My parents are from Indianapolis, but they made a decision to raise me in Burlington. I was there until I was 18. That was a rough time and a rough experience, mostly because of bullying around my race. So that was challenging. But during that time, I came to know God as a God of love and a God of protection. And that was really meaningful for me, really saved me in a lot of ways to just know that there was a God who loved me. And I always will credit my parents because they told me a story about who God was as a protector, and then introduced me to other people who had tough times in their kind of youth or formational experience, whether that was Joseph in the Bible, or whether that was the struggles that someone like Moses had. And then they just popped open right next to the Bible, some civil rights books, right? And it's like, hey, look at these times that these people had. And so they really gave me a big and broad story that I could find myself in.
So your parents are showing you the Bible and the civil rights story from when you're like a kid, like
probably I started getting bullied in second grade. So maybe they did before, but probably somewhere between second and fourth, I know it definitely started. And it was like looking back, I mean, it was both my parents, but it was my mom, I think, led the way with that. She was a teacher and she just, I think, knew what she was doing. She's like, if my kid's going to have this experience, he's going to know that he's still loved, and he's going to know that he's also in the story. Like his story is in the book. And then it was a Bible, that book, but also in like the history books. And that was like powerful for me and like a massive influence on what I thought about the world.
So run that backward a little bit then. So if that's the instinct of your mom, your dad, they're from Indianapolis? They grew up in Indianapolis?
Yeah, they both did.
So they've grown up with somehow that in their consciousness. I mean, were they raised in the church and then kind of in the civil rights movement? I mean, how did that frame for them?
Yeah, those are some of my favorite stories. So my dad is raised Pentecostal, So Black Church Pentecostal. And my mom was in what I call the Black Mainline. So she was Presbyterian. But Black Mainline is still, you might be dressing, actually, they're both dressing good, but like you might sit down a little bit less, but then it's just like, how much do you pop up for the Holy Spirit? Versus the Pentecostal church, they're standing already, like the standing is happening. So they were similar in some ways, but they had actually a really powerful experience of coming together because they were junior high school sweethearts. And like their faith story was really interesting because basically when they were probably 18, 19, their faith got real for them. And so that's kind of their journey of kind of sharing their faith together and coming to know Jesus together. But the civil rights stories, they were all super present for them. I think when they were in their early teens, that's when Robert Kennedy got shot and killed. And there were just powerful stories of civil rights folks, in their lives. So that was part of how they grew up. That was just, the regular kind of Indianapolis experience of seeing a civil rights speaker come. Or I think one of the most powerful things is actually when Robert Kennedy came to Indianapolis after MLK was assassinated. And that was one of the major cities in America that didn't have rioting. And they heard about that the next day at school. Wait, Kennedy came and shared. So all that stuff was really influential for them, informative for them.
That's interesting. So when you say that the civil rights speakers are coming, is that in their church? Is that just in the city?
That's just in the city. Yeah, not their churches.
Okay. So, wow.
And it's public. It's, yeah.
So they're just steeped, raised in a deep faith, different but similar. And then they're also, aware of all the things that are happening at that time. I mean, it's assassinations. I mean, you described 2 in a row right there, just sort of casually, because that was what was happening. And then, but then they moved to Burlington, Iowa. And what's in Burlington? Why are
a job for my dad? Yeah, my dad's a doctor, and so he got to be a doctor there and open up a practice there. And I think that was important for him to get that started and to feel like he was making some progress, some momentum, in his role.
And forgive me, I'm not super familiar with Burlington, Iowa, but it sounds like. I mean, I'm just
Why not, Jay?
But I mean,
it was the capital of Iowa. Did you know that?
Well, I just learned a new thing right now, so that's good. But it sounds like from what just listening to you in Indianapolis, they're in a lot of Black culture. They have Black friends. They're in a Black church. They moved to Burlington, Iowa, which I imagine was probably a shock for them as much as anyone. I mean, so was there like a big Black community, Black church? I mean, was all that stuff a part of their life or?
So I think the answer is no. My dad did do, I think, 1 year in Iowa City as part of his training.
Okay.
And so I think that almost was a red herring for him, or this kind of experience where, in bigger cities, you just get more of everyone. And so I think maybe he thought, it's Iowa, but I can do this. Burlington is not Iowa City. If anyone knows Iowa, they know that for sure. And so all of that made Burlington a lot harder for me in particular, and probably for my family. It made it shocking in some ways. And then also just like, we know what we're going to get. We're not going to be surprised when we don't hear this music, when we can't find this church, when our friends look different. And also when we find ourselves going back to Indiana, like every weekend, which is essentially what we did. I thought that was more normal to have a 5-hour drive every weekend or every other weekend. It turns out people don't actually do that a lot. But I didn't know that because that's what we were up to.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you're growing up very differently than your parents. But yet they're bringing all of this knowledge and information, the experiences they'd had with suffering, the civil rights movement. Those are being entered into as you're experiencing these different bullying experiences. And so tell me, I mean, and we don't have to go into great detail here. I don't want to create more pain for you than necessary. But when you describe sort of bullying, I mean, because I know you, Josh, I know you to be like a strong, bright, courageous, intelligent man. Like you're just full of guts. And so when I'm listening, when I've heard your story even, it's so impacted me to see how you've grown through what was a pretty prolonged period of pain in your life.
Yeah.
To become this kind of man. So like, how do you, when you think back on all those experiences and what was happening, like, tell us a little bit about what that was like and what you were learning, and how your parents were helping you and how you met the Lord in that, and how you think that's shaped some of how you do your life now.
Yes. So when I was in elementary school, it was really people who were, it's stuff they're bringing home or they're bringing to school from home. Mm-hmm. And, it's things that are harsh and they stick with you for a long time or forever, but you understand, at least I think I understood, like, this is silly or this is not true. So something like being in mass, I went to a Catholic school and a person turning next to me and saying, all Black people go to hell. And I'm looking at that person just being like, how could you say that? And that hurts, but it's not true. Or at least I knew it wasn't true. And you can think about funny jokes you could have told later on, like, wait, you don't know Jesus is Black, but right. I wasn't that confident then. I wish I was. That would have been awesome. But I knew on some level, this just isn't right. And so that's where my mom and my dad doing what they did, like basically giving me a second education, really helped me and just allowed me to be stronger. Where things got challenging was in my formation as, a preteen teen, because then people were saying things that had a different level of maybe threat to them. So someone saying, hey, I see people that sit on their porches, they're like, porch monkeys, something like that. And you're not like that. You're one of the good ones. But if you were, I would know what to do with you. And then, mimicking a gun or, a kind of shooting reference. And these are the people that I knew had guns. And that started to feel a little bit like, I don't know if I'm safe anymore. And this is a time when it was the Columbine shooting. And so that was the generation I was being raised in. And it just felt scary at times. Then I went to this program that God really used. It wasn't a Christian program at all. It was just like an educational thing at University of Iowa. Because I think I'd started to ask questions like, is this me? Like, do I just have a problem? Like, I know that this feels scary, but is there something where like, shouldn't I have friends to back me up or like defenders? I don't have any of that. And I just actually had friends for the first time. These were short, like week-long programs, 2-week programs. I went 2 years, 7th grade and 8th grade. Yeah.
Wait. So you're saying, do I have a problem? Meaning, do somehow I deserve this? Like there's something wrong with me?
It wasn't exactly, do I deserve this? It's more like, why? Like, it was more in my friend group. Wouldn't there be someone to say this isn't right? To say like Josh is funny or he's, I don't know, whatever qualities people would say. I mean, I didn't even think someone could say he's human. So that's why we shouldn't do it, right? It's right. Like, there's something about him that's worthy of protecting, right? No one really was doing that in my friend group, even though we all kind of knew this was happening. And all of a sudden in these week-long programs in the summer, my 7th and 8th grade year, I learned I was someone who could make other people laugh. I was someone who could tell a story that could move people. I'm someone that even in casual ways was worth protecting or worth standing up for. And I hadn't had that experience at school. I'd had that experience in other ways, but not with people who were my age, who were in, just like your friends. And that really helped because it was almost like this secret place I could go back to. I know that's true of me and it will be true of me again. But for these next 4 years of high school, that probably will not be true for my experience. And it really wasn't. So that was a different period of then just waiting for my senior year, waiting to apply, waiting to get the heck out of Iowa so I could finally go back to that space and place of belonging that I knew was there for me somehow. Yeah. And when you're a kid, your family should be that, and it is that, but it's just so different having this kind of formation of your peers are the ones that influence you so much. So I knew that like my extended family and my family had a lot of that. But that high school time was in some ways where the safety stuff and like the concerns about guns and who was making jokes was the highest. But it was also where my longing for something new was the highest as well. And I saw it, like I could touch it, I could taste it. It's like 4 more years, 3 more years, 2 more years. And then finally I was out. But that's my journey.
So when you think back, Josh,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe you don't know, but I think you've done a lot of reflecting on how these dynamics work in general, let alone in your life. But when you think back on like maybe it's the culture of the school, maybe it's the kind of kids that you were around, maybe it was this one friend group, maybe it's an era and a time. Like, what do you think was going on with those friends of yours? I mean, what's going on with the school? What's going on with those kids? Like, what makes it so they're not able to see what you can see now, or what maybe could be seen in this other environment? What was, now with all the years later, you can look back and go, like, because those kids right now are walking around doing whatever they're doing, right? I mean, and they may or may not have been aware of what that was. I mean, what do you think was going on?
So I think in some people, like the person that said all Black people go to hell, they wrote me an apology. Their parents wrote something. That person never did anything again like that. They also never did anything to stop anything like that. But like that was a mistake they made. And I think they pretty clearly got called on that by their parents. I mean, my parents got involved then. That's, again, that elementary school stuff. I was never that worried about that. I think even as a kid, to be honest, that stuff, it didn't go as deep as other things. Now, the stuff about folks that were expressing what I would say is like kind of violence, I think that was a deep resentment. I mean, if we're going to be honest, one of the things I think is that would have been true is if we were growing up in the era where like, I think my junior year, sophomore year, one of those years was like LeBron's high school game. And if I was LeBron, I would have been fine. I mean, maybe a lot of people could say that, right? But if I had game, if I could play basketball, it would have been fine. If I had something that I could have sold that they wanted to buy, I would have skated through. But it's that the things that I was working with, which was, being like nerdy and smart in some ways and like having a weird sense of humor that I think now people enjoy and all that stuff. That wasn't really just being me, to be honest, right? Like that wasn't something people were interested in, because if what I meant to them was a certain kind of Black person, well, I couldn't compete with what they saw on BET or what they saw on, NBA Live, like, because that's maybe all they thought of Black people. And if that's what you think and you're meeting me, you might get pretty disappointed if that's what you want. And that's the only thing you want. That's me being like pretty honest about what I thought about them then, and also what they might have thought about me. And that could be a version of still passing in the night. I just think that's what happened. I think they wanted something that they didn't get. And I think I was pretty good at being me and not trying to be something else. One, because you can't become a great basketball player overnight, which I learned many times trying to play until I stopped in 8th grade. Yep. But in other ways, more seriously, I knew that they were looking for something that wasn't something I was willing to fake or to pretend or to sell. And if you know anything about Black folk and Black history, there's many people, right, that want Black folk to be something for them. And even at a young age, I wasn't interested in doing that. It was pretty clear of that in ways that when I went to college and learned like more of the history, I was like, wow, dude, like I really didn't want to do that even when I was a kid. But that was just true of me. And I think people didn't like that. So that's part of what I would say. I mean, because I think about this stuff a lot, I have like a cajillion more thoughts about the ways that I showed up and ways I could have done different things. But I just feel like I was a kid. And so,
well, they were kids.
That's the biggest thing. And they were kids too. And that's the biggest thing is I think I was trying to be me in a place that didn't know how to deal with that.
Well, and that's what strikes me is also you don't have, even your little crew of black friends where you're like, hey guys, can you believe what this dude just said over here? Or there isn't that sense of like, can we just check out our assumptions with each other for a minute? I mean, so even if, for example, even if there was, jock LeBron-ish guy that, you're like, well, they treat him a lot differently than they treat me or whatever. Like you really are in a pretty isolated space. So there isn't people to check your assumptions with. And frankly, when they're contending with you, they're just contending with you. So they can just be whoever they want to be. Like the thought that like somehow you're going to be able to get somebody to help you out is pretty low. So they feel free to be as rude or as powerful or as demanding as they want to be. And what really strikes me, Josh, is then that your parents are giving you a narrative to help you understand that, number one.
Yeah.
And then number two, how this like dynamic of how power works and what can and can't I do in that, and how do I escape this, and then just the reprieve of God to give you another environment. Like, no, you actually are able to do all kinds of interesting things people like. At least gives you a horizon. Like, oh, okay, there's another way to be. But what strikes me about you, I was praying for you this morning as I was thinking about our time, like, but that also gives you the ability to understand people who don't fit in and how they can be exploited and mistreated and how they can be misunderstood and how they might even become used to that. I mean, just when I think about you and the way you do ministry and the people you love and the way you serve and the kind of pastor you are, and then this role, we say all the time how God does work all things together for good. Like that's a Bible verse, so we're supposed to believe it. So we're not allowed to say we're not sure that's true, but I don't know that we always think that's true. And I can't imagine 13 or 15 or even 17 or maybe even 18-year-old Josh can see a way that this little window of your life would be used for good, like something that God would intend to do in and with and through your life. And that just strikes me so much because I think about all the folks who have stories like yours, which is a lot of people, by the way.
Yeah.
And how maybe they haven't figured out how that is supposed to be used for good, or it turns into a certain kind of bitterness or fear, or really sometimes when people have not had power and been mistreated, they're like, now I must get power at all costs. I'll do whatever it takes to be in charge, to be powerful, so no one gets to talk to me like that again. And God has just done this amazing thing in your life. So I'm cheating a little bit because I know where we're going, but it strikes me how this scenario that you would not wish on an enemy is a thing God has used for good powerfully, and how your parents were giving you the seeds of that as parents.
Yeah, they were
early
awesome.
on with the Bible, with thinking about the civil rights movement. Anyway, it's just powerful. Okay, so you get to 18 and you get to escape.
Yes.
And so where do you escape to?
I escaped to Yale University, New Haven, Connecticut, other side, just like the East Coast of the country. And I'm finally out of Iowa. I've been back to Iowa 3 times since I've been 18. And so I'm just gone. And it's phenomenal. It's amazing. I love it. And I also quickly realize I am chasing after something and I don't know what that is, because I thought it was to leave. But once you get on the plane and you leave, like that's already happened. So now, like, what am I chasing? And that's when God became even more real to me, not just as a person that was protecting me, but as a person who I was now asking, like, how big and how real are you? Because what college was for me, especially early college, was learning about the thing I went through and how those dynamics play a role in so many bigger things in society, whether that's like American civil rights stuff, whether that's war, whether that's this, whether it's that, just like how conflict, when it's not treated well, ends up changing history. That's what I was learning. And I was asking the question, God, where are you in that? Because you protected me, but also protecting me took like 12 years. And like no one really, like I wasn't interested in justice then exactly, in terms of like justice to them, but like nothing really happened to the people who were mean or did all these things.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like I was thriving. I just literally left. Like I moved away from a place where I couldn't thrive. So I started to see how that's a lot of people and that's a lot of history. And where is God in all those questions? And it got to the place where I felt like my questions were bigger than God. And I still wanted to believe in God, and I still experienced God as loving, and I still felt God was personal, but I just had to be real that like the questions were bigger. And then
bigger than God. You mean bigger than like the framework you had of how God worked? Like God worked to like love me and be kind to me, maybe even save me. But what about like all this other stuff? Like, don't you have anything to do with that, God?
God worked. It's you gotta follow me here. God worked well enough for my framework, right? For me personally.
Yep.
But then as I was examining, I was like, but wait, like, did he though? Because I like just barely escaped, right? So I'm like in quiet moments having that conversation in my heart, where in much louder moments, I'm like, but how does this make sense for like anything right now? And it's really the collision of, a private faith experience with learning more about the world, learning more about justice, learning more about how if God is real, then isn't God still active in that way, not just in our own hearts and imagination. So I didn't realize I was stumbling upon like a big theological conversation, but that was basically my first 2 years of college. And what resolved it was the strangest thing. I went to Australia quite randomly. This was just a trip that my dad was like, do you want to go on this? My dad, if you know him, is just like a traveler, always putting together experiences that are cool like that. I think from his time, honestly, not having any ability to do that growing up in Indianapolis. So he's kind of overcorrecting in a way. So that was part of it. So I went with my journal, my Bible, and the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis. And so I was reading Screw Tape Letters and seeing how there are these two demons in the story, talking to a person or writing about a person, and how they're trying to take away, his growing relationship with God. And as I went to Australia, and, I'm a museum guy, so I'm learning things, learning the history, I'm like blown away. Because in the history of Australia, it's basically some of the horrors of America collapsed at a later time frame, and like all with this group, the Aboriginal people. So that's like things like internment, kind of even things like forced labor, definitely just discrimination. And I look at the times, I'm like, this must be wrong. Like this must supposed to be like, say, 1500 or 1600, but it's not. It's so late. And as I'm reading the Screw Tape Letters and seeing how personal evil is working out, I all of a sudden have something click, which is, what if systemic evil works the same way? What if it's just as persuasive or cunning or calls to people and says, hey, they look different. You can treat them differently then. You got here in Australia in a certain way, but don't you want to get ahead? Then you need to do this to them. And I saw that same whisper of the enemy we see in a personal way in that book all of a sudden be systemic. And as I read the rest of the book and realized that the answer to, the questions that were being asked in Screw Tape Letters was something like love, I realized, what if that's the same thing? And it was like this kind of crazy, doesn't make sense realization. But I just had this moment as clear as day where I was like, wait, love is what defeats evil. Love defeated evil in my own life personally. Love is defeating evil in this, crazy book, the Screw Tape Letters. And what if that's true, that love defeats evil, even on the grandest stage, the biggest stages of something like history? And what if it's just that we think love is too silly or naive or too weak? And what if that's why we don't give that a chance? And I have to just be honest, something connected in my faith that I'm still feasting off of to this day. And it was like I saw colors differently. It was like I saw the world differently. it was like I had like a supercharged battery pack. And I came back to Yale just with the sense of, hey, professors, and I didn't think people were like against me or against my faith, but I literally just wanted to like engage. I think it's love. Like, I think love is what changes things. And they're like, well, show me a source, give me a citation. And I was like, okay, well, let's go to, Dr. King. Let's go to Kierkegaard, Works of Love. Let's go to that. And I just started finding people throughout history that were silly enough to write down, even academically, that love, however they define it, which usually is something like unconditional love, agape love, that was the only thing that had the power to change something like human selfishness. That is what leads to all this conflict that then, gets bigger and bigger. And I don't think my life's ever been the same since.
I was going to say, how old are you for that when you go?
I'm 20. I'm either 19 or 20.
Wow. So early on into college.
Yeah.
Your faith now takes on this bigger scope. All of a sudden you're like, wait a minute. Because what were you going to school to do?
I didn't know.
You didn't know? Okay. Yeah.
Not at all. I mean, I could give you the list of majors and things, but I had no idea.
You didn't actually know. Right. But now all of a sudden you're going, wait a minute. My faith now takes on not just a personal dynamic, but a systemic one. These things that I've known personally, what if those things are what change like the real world as well?
Yes.
But now you're still 20. You don't really have like, oh, and therefore I will now. You just got to go back to school, I guess.
Yeah. I had been getting involved in some justice communities, and I had been part of this kind of ragtag Bible study. And I kind of felt like, oh my gosh, if this whole love word is real, I think I have to start there in those groups. So with the justice folks that don't believe, you can follow Jesus and care about justice, which was the culture then. Maybe it still is now, but that was how the campus culture was. They were so surprised that I loved Jesus, so surprised that I brought up Bible stories as something that was relevant for what we were talking about. And then in Christian circles, which I was involved in, but on the crunchier and more ragtag side, justice was almost like a bad word at the time. Like you didn't really say that word, which is funny that I don't think people resonate at all right now in this culture and climate. I mean, maybe, but like in some ways, justice is a buzzword now. When I went to school, that wasn't the case. So I was in these weird communities and I was like, well, let's see if love can bring people closer together. And I was also in community just generally with Black folks, with other groups of color. And what I was thinking about with them was, maybe if I just love them well and try to befriend them, what if that's even pastoring? Is that what it actually is? Is it being a shepherd somehow, being kind to people? So I had these kind of three groups, right, of justice folks of color that sometimes were in justice stuff, and then sort of a Christian sphere. And then I felt like, because I was taking my faith pretty seriously, this is often a college problem, I felt like God was like, and you should probably go to church. And I was like, oh, going to church, like, that would be good. Like I'm trying to like practice my faith radically and I'm not even like a regular church attender. I'm like, okay, so let me go to church. So in my sophomore, junior year, all those changes started to happen. And my life started to have some tracks now as I'm like thinking about, well, what does love look like practically right here, right now with these different groups in these different places? And that was very exciting. College was so much better trying to make love practical than my first 2 years where I was more like, how can God just asking questions. I was just continually in like an existential moment, which was pretty boring at the end of the day and not fun on an emotional level.
Torturous.
So that ended,
totally.
Basically. So that ended, which was great.
Well, but tell me about how church, because when I hear people talk like this, church is sort of the last thing people think about, not one of the first things.
Yeah.
How did church become like, man, this is important. I got to prioritize being even at the thing or in a community of people or.
Yeah. So I love that question. One of the things is I realized what I was doing already felt church-like. So I was going to things weekly, communing with people, connecting with people. And yet I knew I was missing something and I felt a challenge from God. Hey, I didn't say just do community circles. I said church, the real church. And I felt that was so important for me to get connected to something that was institutionally saying it was about Jesus and anyone could come. It wasn't a private club. I mean, you read James and you're like, okay, if something's just private, like no one can like join or enter. I don't know if that's it either. Like there was something about that open door. And so I said, let's just try it. And so I actually went to a church called United Church of Westville. It's an Asian American church, not Asian American. My Black friends randomly told me I should go. They went before I did. And then the first day I was supposed to go, they just bailed. And like one of them sort of came back sometimes. So essentially they're like, you should go to this church. We'll never go with you. Bye. But I got hooked because I saw people who were trying to put love in action. Now, to be very honest, they didn't really do justice stuff. And that really bothered me. But I realized the fact that bothered me, I felt was doing something in me and doing something in my faith, because I had to manage that tension of I'm really bothered by something I'm not seeing. And yet they're welcoming me into their community. They're like throwing birthday parties, seemingly like multiple times a day for like different people. Like, you guys always throw birthday parties. They're just loving people really lavishly and generously. And I'm like, well, what about that dude in the corner? Like, what about this other situation? And I realized just pointing out what they could do and also being annoyed, and even more so, being annoyed at what they could do, that's not love either, right? So somehow there was something in the tension of, what does it mean to walk with the community slowly, to receive from them, and also to give whatever I have while we're worshiping together and learning the scriptures. I was like, I think whatever we're doing, if we're doing that, that's church. And that is kind of frustrating sometimes. And like, what if that's actually just what church is?
This summer and fall, the Vineyard USA community is gathering all over the country. Make sure to check out our events page at vineyardusa.org to learn more about these gatherings that we have for our 9 regions, our 4 associations, and through our entities like Vineyard Worship and Vineyard Youth. You can register for an upcoming event online. We're asking God to cultivate an expectancy and a hunger for our times together. Hope to see you there.
We've talked about this more than once. I've never asked you this because I thought it each time. So, like, black guy Josh in Asian church. I mean, like, listen, like, the only times you usually see that is if you're dating someone in the church, or you're wanting to date someone in the church. I'm just saying. I get it. I'm just describing it.
Not my intentions.
Well, I know, but that's what makes it all the more interesting. So what attracted you was the community life, like the way these people love God, they loved each other. You just said birthday parties, and there was something about the way they lived life together.
Their love for each other was so effusive, was so connective, was so, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, it was like the most thriving micro community I think I saw at the university. And it was all not just for one another, but like opening up to folks that were kind of in their world. So one of the things I love the most, I'm going to get super nerdy, is like there's these cultural groups at Yale, right? And these, so they were, Chinese group at Yale, Korean American students at Yale. And what UCW did was they were so open-hearted to say, like, we know these folks don't want to come to church. We know that they might have had an immigrant church experience. We're going to consistently invite them out because we know that somewhere God's working in the background. And so, yes, the Korean American president, of KC was drunk last night, but let's invite him because, like, we know his grandma's probably praying for him. And like, they just did. And people came in a way that was even different in the Black community, honestly, at the campus. Like, people would come and I knew them through different worlds. So I was like, oh, like, I know you because I'm connected to like the kind of Black cultural world. And all of a sudden I started seeing like the Korean American president or like, the Chinese American president. And they're coming just because UCW is like so persistently inviting them out. And I just saw like they have such a heart to build community, not just for them, but for those they know need community and also need a community with God. And I was just so captivated by that. And then obsessed with the question, what if they did that for the person that lives on the street? What if they did that for the New Havener that doesn't even know if they can get in the iron gates of Yale? But there was like a persistence with how they loved people that I just admired so much, and obviously was enjoying myself too. But I just felt like, yeah, they modeled it so well. It's hospitality, but we often talk about hospitality. We talk about Asian Americans, but it wasn't just hospitality, because they didn't just set the plate out for like another and sort of like wait to see if they came, but they were like literally going to different groups, to different environments, and saying like, you must sit here, like, please come and enjoy with us. Like, it really was, I guess, hospitality and evangelism.
Yeah.
And so I mean, not only did I enjoy it, but I started to do that, like not well in any way, but just that constant invitation. Like, if you invite tons of people, don't somehow have to say yes.
Yeah.
I just started to copy it, and some people did say yes.
Yeah, just built. It's just interesting. It's interesting to watch these worlds converge, right? Like, so I have this heart for the world to be made right. I have this sense of feeling heard and alienated, and like I'm not connected because of the place that I am. Now I'm in this new place. I find these people that do that really well, but they're not really like me. So interestingly, just like the other thing, they weren't like you, and that was a reason to not be kind to you. Now I'm not like these people, but that's a reason to be kind to me. Meanwhile, you have all this justice stuff firing in your heart around like, well, how does the world get put back together? This is not the way it's supposed to be. It's just, again, our stories are fascinating. Like the way God is weaving things together to put a call in you. Meanwhile, you're doing school, like, I don't know, I'll do these majors. And so then you're in this window, you're kind of in these different kinds of justice groups. You realize I need to be in church. This is a church you find. How did you stumble your way into the Vineyard? How did you find the Vineyard?
So when it was my senior year, a Vineyard church was being planted called Elm City Vineyard. And a few of my friends were going. These were mostly folks of color, kind of in like the justice Christian scene. And they're like, you got to check out this church. It's so exciting. Elm City Vineyard. Like, you just got to come. And I'm like, what? Like, I go to a church already. Like, this isn't this isn't an event. This isn't like a lecture series. Like, I already go to a church. They're like, no, I'm telling you, it's amazing. Like, you've got to come. I was like, this is the most annoying thing ever. Like, just stop talking about this church. I'm not going to go. I already go to church. Like, just chill. And so I graduated Yale, having gone to this other church. But then I kind of was thinking about it. I was like, do I want to go to a more of a student church? Like when I'm in grad school, because I'd signed up to go to Yale Divinity School, which was basically a shameless effort to spend more time with Tina, who's now my wife. Another story for a different day. So I basically choose Divinity School. Not to necessarily grow vocationally in ministry, but just to be closer to her, who I don't think at that point I even told her I liked her. I really did though. So that's why I wanted to say. So anyway, so I heard about this church and I was thinking, should I not be a part of a student church? Because that thing I was saying was that, like, I was always wondering, like, can you keep inviting people? And I noticed, and I don't think it was right, but I noticed I invited non-Asian people to this Asian American church, and people would sort of like look at me funny, and then they would kind of say no immediately. Or the ones that did come, they would come once and be like, oh, thanks for that, like, experience. But like, I could tell, like, none of them were going to make that. Like,
I'm not going to, like, you've made a jump that I'm not going to make. Right.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And
totally.
so I had to basically say, like, is this what I want the fight to be? And does the fight have to be this hard? And I was like, I don't think it does. Like, I like this, but not everyone does need to like this. And I get it in some ways. So maybe I should go to this church that is apparently, multi-ethnic. I had heard and seen just a number of people from different ethnicities. So I was like, I guess it's open in that way. And so I went. So I went one Sunday, and I have no idea what the teaching was about, both in my memory, I don't know, but also probably I didn't understand it. Because at that time we were like super scholarly, like Kierkegaard was mentioned, like at a minimum of like 5 times, like there's all this stuff going on, like every idea in the sermon. But when we did worship and we put open space for God, something was changing in my heart. Like I remembered in those moments other experiences I had with God and with the Holy Spirit. I don't know if I would have said it that way. And I also felt like I was having one. And I also felt like I was going to have more. So it was weird, right? Because it was a pretty abstract experience. Like, it wasn't like God spoke something very specific to me, but it was almost like he reminded me I was a spiritual person through moments of the Holy Spirit. He was letting me know I was having that moment then. And he was saying, and there's more. And I wanted that. And so I was hooked. I think I would have said to you my first Sunday, oh, I'll keep coming back, as if I was trying it. But really, like, I never stopped coming. Like, and it was already clear, this is something I need to continue. And what I did was I practiced the things that God was teaching me, where I invited people, and people would come and they would have a similar experience where there usually was something they didn't get. Either they didn't like the worship, they didn't like the teaching, but God was doing something in their hearts. You know, one of my friends came, and I didn't know this was happening, but he just manifested a demon and it was cast out. I didn't have language for that, but his eyes rolled into the back of his head. And I actually don't watch horror movies, but I guess I watched enough horror movie trailers to be like, I think that's like a demon. Right. And I think this is deliverance. But I also think my friend's like dramatically uncomfortable with that language. So we just said, like, I think God did something good for you, you know? Right. And his whole life and his relationship that he was in is like completely different now, I think, from even that moment. And so I saw people start to stumble in, and no matter who was teaching, what the worship was, they were having experiences with God. And I was like, this is exactly what I've wanted my entire life, was that I can invite someone to a house, to a place, to a community, to a church, and that they could see something for themselves. Not because I said it, not because someone else said it, but because God was doing something in them. And I said, if that's true, then I just need to keep being associated with this church like forever, because I've never really experienced that. I always felt like I was contending with the word someone else was saying, where someone would be like, well, I just don't agree with that. And that was the end of the story. Here, there was something beyond words. There was a real presence of God. And that's what drew people in and had them talk about it with me. So people were processing what was happening with me. And I was like, oh, this is really exciting. They're not just sharing about the ideas. They're sharing about their experiences of, I don't know why I was crying. You know, I don't know why I felt peace, but I'm curious about it and I want to learn more. And maybe it does have something to do with like what they were talking about the whole time, which was Jesus. You know, I love that. It was great.
That's so cool. So then you're hooked into that.
I'm hooked into that right as I'm going into Divinity School, which is kind of convenient because they're like, yeah, who are you? And I was like, well, I guess I'm Vineyard. And they're like, what? Like, you're part of a winery? Like, okay, I guess we'll accept that. You know, I'm like, no. Like, I'm not part of a winery. Like, as my religion, like, it's like a movement of churches called the Vineyard. And then I had to find out what that was. So I'm reading books and listening to John Wimber's stuff because I didn't know. In this world of Divinity School, everyone's curious about your tradition. So people are always asking me, like, what's the Vineyard? And so at the age of 22, I'm explaining to like professors and seminarians, like, what the Vineyard is, with basically like no experience at all. So I'm just catching up. I'm reading The Quest for the Radical Middle the night before. So my professor is asking me for my assignment, what's the Vineyard? I can have something to say, which was fun.
Yeah. But then you're also doing all the things. You're leading a small group and you're helping. Were you an intern at the church?
I was an intern for 3 years, essentially. Yeah. Started to preach. Yeah.
And is that when I was trying to figure out, were you an intern when you came out to Denver, when you came out for a few days, or were you on staff then?
That's a great question. I think I was an intern. I was about to be married. I was about to be the associate pastor. But it was right before I think all that stuff had happened. It's either right before or it's the first fall that I was all those things.
Because it's one of the things I loved. I mean, that's how, because I mean, that would have been, how long ago is that now? That would have been
10 or 11 years ago.
10 or 11 years ago, I'm teaching at an East regional event. Like, was it the Cause Conference?
Yeah, the Cause to Die For.
Yeah. And we get to know each other. I was like, you should come out to Denver if you want some time. I mean, we're just talking somewhere. And then you just are like, okay. And next thing I know, I get like a email and a phone call like, hey man, I'll come. And you did. I was like, you can come. You're just going to do what I'm doing, which I think, you know, we dropped my kids off at something and rode around and just talked about ministry and life and getting married. And I was like, man, this is an incredible guy. And then you end up leading the church.
Yes.
It's so cool.
Not right away, but through like a crazy accident. Yes.
Through a crazy accident.
A prophetic accident. God decided to speak about that.
That's right. But I mean, Josh, like, it's not every day that you talk through your story at this level, but I hope as you're even listening to yourself talking, you're going, okay, so this horrible thing's happening, but I see God working that. Then I end up in this church where I don't really fit, but it's because I'm being, no, seriously, but I'm being drawn by this thing God is doing. Then I kind of work sideways into this thing called the Vineyard because I'm encountering the love and the life of God, at which point I'm learning and talking about to where I'll even just like fly to Denver to be with some dude for a few days. No, like it's just encouraging to me. And this is like, I'm trying to think of who told me this. It might have been Floyd McClung. I think Floyd, is an old YWAM leader. I think one of the first times I met him, he said, because I actually went and grabbed him off the stage and took him to lunch at something because I was just so intrigued by him, and we became friends. And he said to me at one point, he just said, Jay, when you meet somebody that you can sense that they have something from God that you want in your life, just try to spend time with them.
Yeah.
Like, just do whatever they're doing. Like, go be near wherever they are and see if you can catch it. And I really took that seriously because I've done similar to what you're describing a whole bunch. Like, I don't know, there's this thing in New York. I met this person. I think I should just fly there and like walk around and see how that goes. And if I'm afforded the opportunity, because sometimes you can't, I can't afford it, or, that seems like so far away. I remember when I was in college, we drove to the Evanston Vineyard and just like went up to church on Sunday and went up to Steve Nicholson. He's like, well, why don't we go get lunch? And I'm like, you would have lunch with me and these random folks I came here with? Or we drove to Atlanta, literally on one day's notice, to see, I think it was called Fire and Ice. It was like this homeless ministry that I was like totally intrigued by. I read about a Vineyard church was doing because we had like all these different homeless folks living with us in this house. And I was like, I don't think we know what we're doing. We should go see what someone else is doing. We just literally drove down there like 10 hours straight. And I think about that little era of time because you can do that in certain windows of your life in a way that if I did that now, I'd have to plan a little more. I still try to do stuff like that, but I plan a little more. But if I did that on like 10 hours notice, or, I've got like kids and, that would probably not be good for my family. But as a single man, it really made sense. But I'm just intrigued by seeing how God knit all these things together. And then would you call it a prophetic accident? However you just said that, you end up the lead pastor leading the church, which is incredible. And then tell me a little bit about that. What's that been like to transition then into being a lead pastor?
It's been great. Part of the story, even in college, was feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't think I want this, but I think I have a pastoral call. And I tried to make that as like abstract as you could think, or like as not being a pastor as you could think. I'm like, I'll be on a team. I'm like, what am I even doing? So I was kind of realizing like, I think I'm just running kind of for no reason from this.
Right.
And by the time I was an associate pastor, I think I realized I love being on this team, but I also feel like there's a vision I have. I don't know what to do with it. I think a lot of people find themselves in that place, and you just try to honor people and serve well. And I think part of the vision was happening at the church. So I was like, cool, that's awesome. But then sort of how things came to the forefront was I realized I should probably do something with this in terms of just discerning next steps. So I was thinking, should Tina and I church plant? So we were praying about that together, thinking about it, thinking about New York City. And then all of a sudden this opportunity opened up, and it's really weird that I didn't see it and a lot of us didn't see it, where we realized we're not really sure who should lead Elm City Vineyard. And then through, a conference and people speaking into it and us just being a little bit more honest for one weekend, we're like, oh, I think I do have this vision for a local church. And carrying that forward has been such a joy, because a lot of things that you mentioned in my story, I care about on a church level. So can we have, a justice conversation happening in the church alongside a conversation about community and connection? And can those be in tension with each other? How do we all feel known and safe and loved at the church if we're hanging out with our city, knowing that those folk might not want even to be our friends? And so how do you do that kind of work together? Or what do we do about some of the most pressing problems that we don't see maybe our city representatives dealing with? Or we do, but they're dealing with them without the church. Could the church come and help and bless? And so I just got really excited. I love New Haven, the city I'm in, because it's such a small city. It's about 125,000 people, and the metro is a lot bigger. But what I always would say about New Haven is if something good was happening, everyone would know. If something was truly good, truly effective, truly amazing, the secret would be out. And so the question is, local church, what are you doing then? Because if we are minding our Father's business and trying to do things to serve folks who are homeless and serve our city that has to deal with that issue, whether the church is dealing with it or not, right? If we're to be involved with peace in our city and we take serious the homicide count, that our homicide count reflects how well we neighbor each other, how well we love each other. I just started to see how as pastors, even more than the work we do, framing something as a theological issue, framing something as a thought from God can change hearts.
Yeah.
Even just that thought of, do you think your homicide count reflects how well you love your city and how well you love God? I realized that I don't think I was asking that question of the church. I don't think other people in the church were asking that question. And I realized, what if you can lead a church off the strength of that question? And then you follow that down. That's really what excited me and excites me about leading a local church. And I saw our church start to bite and to say, okay. And then to also say, here's what we need, Josh, more. We're going to need Sabbath now because this is intense. We're going to need more Holy Spirit because we feel weak and powerless. And we're going to need authentic connection and community, not just with those that we hope will be in our church, but with who's actually here. And so I started to realize we're in a dialogue and in conversation all the time as a church. And then that's real life. So what do I need to do as a pastor to help our people feel secure enough with God and with each other to pursue bold risk-taking? And also, what do I need to do so our aspirational vision doesn't just stay in the sky, but at least in some parts, it's coming down to real things that are accessible for the average person. And that's an everyday challenge for me. And it's been the challenge of almost the last decade, but I absolutely love it. It excites me. It motivates me. And as I think about Vineyard churches doing that, because we all have our own issues that we're dealing with locally, it might not be homelessness for you. It might not be even violence or homicides for you. I think the local church can grow through naming those tensions, through holding those tensions, and then through finding out what do your people need if you were to continue to hold those same tensions for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. For us, it was really clear. For us to hold the tensions that we were doing, we needed spiritual formation. We needed the work of God in our souls to help maintain the risk-taking that we were trying to do and have been trying to do now for almost 15 years. And we weren't as honest about that before because it was cooler to think, we're fine, we're awesome, we can do it. And we just realized we can't. We need something else. We need another engine. And I love that about the Vineyard, is I feel like part of the Vineyard is recognizing through John 5:19, we only do what we see the Father doing. Well, the Father's actually helping us. The Father's actually trying to serve us as we serve others. So how does the Father want to help you in your local church right now? And then to get equipped in that, even if it feels like you take your eye off the ball a little bit, but actually it's going to help you be better at the end of the day. So yeah, I love thinking about the local church and thinking about how, for me as a pastor, but also serving other pastors, we can actually just sort of tweak things or frame things differently such that people can get a whole new kind of revelation or perspective about what their church could be up to or how their church could be served so they can serve other people better.
Yeah, and it's what I love about you, Josh, as we were opening up these new jobs, justice and evangelism, and, like everyone else on our team, honestly, you didn't have to do this. Like, your life is plenty full. You obviously love your city, you love your church. So for you to even apply, let alone to take this job, is a risk. It's a sacrifice. And so, and yet what I love is we give away what we actually have, so we can't take people to places we've not been.
Yes.
And so what's exciting is what I have gotten to see in the life of your church and what is in you. Tell us just, a little bit as we just sort of wrap up. What are you really excited about? As you think about this role as A&D, Justice and Evangelism, you think about Vineyard churches, what's in your heart? What are you excited about for the role and what you're able to do to serve Vineyard churches?
I'm excited that the work of the church and the work of our Vineyard churches is already present on the streets. Like, there's nothing you have to create to do the work that God's calling you to do as you're trying to pursue justice, and I would say evangelism too. So if you look at what would be genuine good news for your city, genuine good news, that's probably some kind of issue of making a wrong right, and then some kind of issue of sharing that news with other people so they kind of join on board, either as someone that's being helped or someone that can become someone that serves. That's probably already happening in your city and town. And so what if every Vineyard church was able to discern through the same kinds of things we do when we pray for sick people, where is my city sick? Where are we experiencing some kind of strength or gifting? And how can those things come together to serve in a powerful and effective way? And what that looks like, I think, is noticing real people that have real needs and getting into relationship with them, getting proximate with them, and then starting to think, what would it look like to scale that in different ways? So for us, that's looked like noticing people in our city are so distrustful of service providers, but there's tons of services in New Haven. And so what we did is we helped kind of revitalize a ministry that was going, but it was becoming less effective, called Agape. And it was a ministry for folks who are homeless. And we noticed something in our ministry is that we probably saw about 3 people every year get out of homelessness, which is a small number, but for a group of about anywhere from 25 to 80 people that came, that's like, a decent percentage. But what we realized was happening with all of them is they were starting to trust people more and starting to get more services that we weren't providing as Elm City Vineyard, but that our city was already providing. And we noticed something, that part of that soft work we were doing was allowing people to trust people again, allowing people to be safe again for them. And so we realized, the people we're actually encountering, they weren't actually getting services at all. And now, partly through our ministry, some are becoming housed, which is our ultimate, goal, housed in a building and then housed in community, hopefully the church, and hopefully with real connection to Jesus. But we saw that even for those that didn't have that happen, we saw them soften to connection, including connection to God. And that was a way that we partnered with what was already going on. We didn't need to duplicate the services of our city. I didn't think that would be a good thing. But it's a place where we needed to just find out what's our role to play. That's what we did. Now, another thing, that I think is really exciting is there are places where I think we do need to lead and shape things more. I think about something like the gang violence in our city and how many people aren't aware in New Haven of how many lives are taken. In New Haven last year, 25 folks died of homicide, and 20 of those homicides are unsolved. So for those families, those communities, they don't have any, they don't even have a semblance of some kind of public justice. And if you're on the street thinking, well, maybe I should take a life, when you look at the stats of that, you might be thinking, maybe I could do this and get away with it. That's not good for the well-being of our city, for what it means to be a human loved by God in our city. And so we've started to think, of course, we have tons of people doing stuff, but is anyone out in the streets crying out saying the blood cries out for these folks? So we've developed this thing called Liturgies of Homicide, where we're getting together as a community, inviting family, inviting churches, inviting our alder people, our political representatives, and saying, can we say that life was sacred, and can we witness to it, to raise awareness? Because otherwise, it's just a number, and it's a number that's too large at the end of the year, at the end of the day. So those are things that churches can actually do that are both helping systems that are already running in your city, and also doing something new and maybe even provocative, where the church plays a role that has freedom to it. No one thinks at church, I don't think, at least in my city, no one thinks that we should be stopping homicides. No one's expecting us to do that. But if we get out there in the city and start contributing in that way, all of a sudden people are starting to think, wow, I didn't actually realize that was the number. What am I doing? What's my organization doing? How am I contributing to peace in our city? And all of a sudden we're in the mix.
Noticing and then engaging. So
exactly.
So I'm noticing, what are these trends? What are happening? What are these people groups that are moving through my city? I'm noticing more homeless people in this part of the city than I noticed before. Or I'm noticing there's a different demographic or a different feel. I mean, for me, as I just started to decide to get to know principals and superintendents, any city council person, but definitely if you do any ride-alongs with a cop,
yes,
you will learn about your city in ways that you did not know it existed. Like if you do a ride-along for a night shift with, and by the way, most citizens can just do this. You just show up, you sign a form, and you're in a car, which feels a little crazy to think that that's really all it takes, but that is all it takes. And you will learn. The thing I always am telling pastors is, if you let principals and the police department, so whoever's at a school, an elementary school, middle school, and a high school, and whoever are the cops around your area, tell you about your city, you'll learn a lot real fast.
Real fast.
I mean, all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, this is what's trending, or this is the type, it could be a drug thing. It can be alcohol. It can be real estate. The real estate shifting in these three ways, and here's why, or here's the way public housing is changing, or, mostly it's multifamily housing. So apartment complexes change massively. That's an indicator that the city's changing. Either way, by the way. I mean, sometimes because the city suddenly has cool hipster coffee shops, doesn't mean those people disappeared, whoever was there. They went somewhere. They were displaced somehow. So what does that mean? But all of those little meetings require creating some time, praying, and then asking the Holy Spirit, how am I to participate? And I love the way you're saying it. It is collaboration, not duplication. So it's saying, okay, what is already happening? How can I be a part of this? And then there are a few things that you might be asked. Hey, I think we're supposed to start something here. But by and large, there's usually people who have been doing that work before you. If you can get your heart around what they're up to and how can you partner. So as we finish up, I know there's a couple groups we're looking to partner with more nationally to kind of help at the local level that you've been doing some work with. Who are some of those groups, those organizations?
Well, one that, a lot of us know in the Vineyard is Convoy of Hope, doing work with something that, when there's a disaster, in your city, in the nation, around the world, we're all asking, what can we do, And Convoy has this mission to say, one, we've already been doing some preventative things probably, but also we're already there. We're already doing things in your city, in your region, in the nation, around the world. And that's exactly the kinds of people we want to be partnering with, because the action's already been happening. And all we have to do is support, cheerlead, find out if there's a way that we can be involved in the local level. And so that's an organization that I love. And they're always doing that with Jesus in mind, in terms of how is the local church helping, but also what's the impact look like. So that's one that I'm always blessed to hear stories from them, to hear different kinds of, just hear different kinds of stories about what they're up to. So, Convoy is a great one. I think some of the other ones, they're even just, I think what you're talking about, vineyard churches deciding to partner locally. So some of these aren't even, big organizations, but they're vineyard churches are telling me I'm partnering with my city's food bank. One of the stories I love is Dave Hansen in Yakima, Washington, where he just asked his local food bank, what do I need to do? And now they're doing so much. I think they're helping, I think it's maybe like 5-6 times more than who they see on a Sunday for their church service, just through saying to their local city food bank, hey, what can we do? And so many of the connections are actually through vineyard churches, local churches that are partnering on a big level. And, Dave's a part of Vineyard Justice Network. That's a great organization that we have in the Vineyard that's trying to help people at each local church find out what's the issue of justice that they might care about, what's the process by which they can, really find out what's for them. So that could be a discernment process they go through. That could be doing a coaching or mentoring thing that BJN sets up. And then also just connecting and saying, as a Vineyard, we're going to have churches all over the nation that are doing this as our worship and compassion unto the Lord. So not saying that this is a side justice thing. We're not like just fans of justice. We're people who are saying, like, to worship God, this is what we feel convicted and compelled to do. So BJN acts as a gathering space, but also an equipping space, and then also a space of testimony. I only know that story from Dave through knowing Vineyard Justice Network. Yeah. So that's one in the Vineyard, convoys outside of the Vineyard. But I'm excited, man. There's so many more partners I think we have on the horizon as we as the Vineyard seek to say, we don't, again, think we need to create a Vineyard blank, effort, but who's already doing it? And can we partner with them? And I think we're going to get some of those partnerships actually from our local churches. I think they're going to tell us some of the people that can be good, that either might be regional or national connections. So I'm super excited for Vineyard churches to be telling us what's working all around the country, whether it's a small town, a city, whatever region we're in. I think Vineyard churches are building these partnerships right at the local church.
I love it, dude. Well, and I'm excited. I mean, I know, we could talk all day. I mean, about the partnerships you've had with Alpha or the different, we've never had a role like this for someone to coordinate efforts to draw the best of what's already happening in the Vineyard, to help other Vineyard churches do it, but then also get partners from the outside. So I know you've been talking to 1 million people trying to sort out all the different plans and ways to do this. I'm super excited. I'm super grateful. And when I hear your story in light of the work you're doing, all the dots connect. I mean, your heart for those who have been underrepresented, those who have been, mistreated, who have come through things. I mean, you have such a heart that is pouring through into this work. And I'm excited to see all that God gets to do with and through you, Josh, in the Vineyard. It's exciting. I'm really honored and grateful that you're willing to take this role.
Well, thank you so much. And it's an honor to do it alongside you. I've seen a lot from you and your church that has been inspiring for a while. Well,
yeah, I'm really struck again, like it is the local church, isn't it? That's our hope. This isn't abstract, like let's try to pull people together, do a random thing here and there. What does it mean to be a people that do the work of justice and evangelism in the places they're located for the redemption of places? And I have hope for the Vineyard to be that. Every single place there's a Vineyard. So thanks a lot, Josh. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And I'm just so excited to see what's ahead.
Same.
All right. Peace.
The We Are Vineyard podcast is a production from the team at Vineyard USA. If you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. Leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Connect with us online for additional resources. Our website is vineyardusa.org, and we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at VineyardUSA. Thanks for listening. See you next week.